Thank you for listening to this broadcast of Hand of the Death God, written and narrated by me, Eric Flynn. If you'd like to support my work, you can purchase this book in paperback or on Kindle from Amazon. Today's story is Temple of the Snake, wherein a trio of adventurers must escape from a fane of horrors. A fairly straightforward action story. It's admittedly one of the less popular tales in my book, but I think it still has enough twists and turns to keep you interested. That being said, here is Temple of the Snake. Akmotesh III gritted his teeth in frustration. He was in a bad position, captured, stripped of his weapons and priestly trappings, shackled, and thrown into a holding cell to be offered as a human sacrifice in the temple of the horrible Snake People. The Snake People, or, as they called themselves in their savage and sibilant speech, the children of Apsut. They believed themselves to be directly descended from the god of chaos and destruction, and made it their sworn duty to rid the world of mankind, whom they saw as agents of order and creation. This spurred them to conduct sporadic, periodic raids on smaller human settlements and trade caravans, either murdering their victims outright, making them slaves, or offering them on blood-stained altars to their writhing and belligerent patron god. The chemish priest of Anubis found himself in this final category. An ill-advised travel route had delivered him right into the scaly claws of the Snake People. He had fought valiantly and cut down several of their ilk, but in the end their numbers were too many, and he had found himself overwhelmed. Perhaps it had been for his fierce valor that his captors saw fit to offer him up as a sacrifice rather than simply kill him on the spot. After all, what better sacrifice to a god of evil than a champion of humanity? Akmotesh reflected on this. It was also likely his exotic appearance and regalia marked him as more than a common traveler. Perhaps the Snake People even recognized the ankh and jackal head symbolism that gave him away as a representative of an enemy faith, but he couldn't be sure. In any case, such conjecture was pointless. His current situation demanded action, not contemplation. Akmotesh had worn shackles before, and he had also learned the secrets for shedding them. Already he had managed to employ some of these techniques toward loosening the iron manacles about his wrists, but this was only a marginal help. His metacarpal bone served as an impassable blockade to the iron bands on their path up and off his hands. But perhaps some lubrication would help. The Chemite glanced around his cell. It was surprisingly spacious and hewed from the same limestone of which the rest of the temple seemed to be carved. Before him was a series of iron bars that prevented his access to the outside world, beyond which was a hallway occasionally patrolled by reptilian temple guards, and, beyond that, a cell much like his own, this one containing a handsome and keen-eyed man who seemed to be observing things as intensely as Akmotesh. The man seemed to be trying to gain his attention, but Akmotesh had other things on his mind at the moment. The interior of the priest's cell was quite empty. Not even a crude cot was furnished. This made sense, as snake men held little understanding for the sleeping habits of humans. A small urn-like jar lay in one corner, likely for excrement. This would abet his escape nicely, Akmotesh thought, but employing it would require shattering it, which would bring the attention of his captors. There were numerous small pebbles and flakes of stone lying about, however, and these, while certainly not ideal, would suit his purpose. The priest rose to his feet. These had been left unbound, to make it easier for his captors to herd him, he reasoned, walked over to a somewhat sharp-looking fragment of stone, and sat down beside it. Though his hands were fastened behind him, it was easy enough to pick up the fragment. He didn't relish the task ahead, especially since the stone shard looked comparatively dull and coarse, but Akmotesh had, during his long and trial-filled priesthood, become accustomed to shedding his own blood for various reasons, and it would be a simple thing to heal the superficial wounds using the power granted to him by his god. The Chemite grimaced with discomfort as he used the gravel shard to worry away the skin around the wrists, making small abrasion cuts in the flesh, and it wasn't long before the wrists were coated with sticky, slippery blood. With his hands properly lubricated, he tugged, maneuvering them this way and that as he tried to urge them through the apertures of the manacles. Though it took some effort and caused some additional loss of flesh and blood, at length the opening of one of his restraints slipped past the bones of his wrist. With silent triumph, the prisoner pulled his hand free. Now for the hard part. Akmotesh knew there were likely 2 or more guards tasked with watching the temple's prisoners, so he would have to be careful how he drew their attention. He would have to be like the wily river crocodile, lying in wait until one of his prey broke away from the herd and drew too close. After some time, he found his opportunity. The sound of footsteps could be heard coming down the hallway. Preparing to strike, Akmotesh rose to his feet and slowly walked to the bars of his cell. After a few moments, one of the temple guards strode into view. It was clad in a leather cuirass and the signature red cloak worn by adherents to the serpent god. In one hand was a crude-looking cudgel with many knots and knobs at one end, no doubt used to subdue unruly prisoners. At the guard's side was a kriss blade, the traditional weapon of its owner's bellicose faith, and, next to that, a keyring, upon which Akmotesh's coal-lined eyes rested momentarily before he set his plan into action. "May the worms dine on your carcass, fork-tongue," Akmotesh said, throwing his body against the bars to add emphasis to the insult. He made sure to keep his hands behind him so as to give the illusion they were still shackled. He wasn't sure if the snake man understood his words. Regardless, they had the desired effect. It began to stalk toward his cell, brandishing its cudgel. Clang! The guard slammed its weapon into the bars in an attempt to scare the prisoner into silence. Akmotesh was unfazed and fired another insult. "You walk like a man. Why not crawl in the dirt on your belly as your father did?" At this, the guard hissed angrily as it stuck its forearm and cudgel between the bars of the priest's cage in an attempt to strike him. It was just the opportunity he needed, and in one deft movement, Akmotesh grasped the creature's arm and pulled, bringing its head into the bars of his cell. His other hand shot out through the bars with lightning speed as though to strike, only to stop suddenly and instead caress the creature's scaly snout. "Death comes to us all," breathed the priest. The snake man's reptilian eyes widened, and its mottled skin began to turn a deathly pallor as its life's essence left its body. Simultaneously, Akmotesh reached out with his other hand and drew the creature's sword from its sheath. After a few moments, the snake man collapsed, and the prisoner took the opportunity to lift the keys from the waist of the dispatched guard. He hastily reached them through the bars to the keyhole on the other side, unlocking the door to his cell with a loud clang. Even as he swung the door open, he could hear the pattering of running feet in the hallway outside, and he knew he'd have no time to enjoy his newfound freedom. Rather, he would have to earn it in battle. Akmotesh burst out of his cell and into the corridor, holding his jailer's kriss-bladed sword with both hands, to see a single snake man guard storming down the hallway, sword at the ready. It was likely the partner of the one whom he had recently slain. Upon reaching the chemist priest, the snake man swung its sword in a wide arc. Akmotesh easily sidestepped the attack and countered with a savage hack to the creature's belly, following up with a lethal thrust that left the creature in a crumpled heap on the ground. Although he had eliminated his immediate captors, Akmotesh realized he was a long way from safety. Anubis only knew how much more hissing anathema lay between him and freedom. Quickly, he unlocked the remaining shackle from his arm and cut off a strip of cloth from the guard's garments. With this, he hastily bandaged the wound on his wrist, using his own blood to trace the sign of the ankh upon the fabric. It would be fully healed in a matter of minutes. His next step was to free his companion. Gwala the Manhunter, Gwala the Shadow Stalker. These were the names given to the black-skinned hunter from the ancient jungles of Zumbuku. Akmotesh had saved him from the flencer's knife when the priest had infiltrated a tribe of cannibals, and the jungle warrior had sworn an oath to one day repay the Kemite by saving his life in return. It was an oath Gwala had fulfilled many times, and yet he continued to follow Akmotesh, as the two had developed a powerful friendship. With keys in hand, the priest walked down the corridor in search of his friend. "Hey, you! Get me out of here!" The keen-eyed individual across from Akmotesh's former cell rushed toward the bars, stretching out a pleading hand to the Kemite. Akmotesh ignored him. He would decide soon whether or not the man deserved his freedom, but for now he had more important matters to attend. After passing several empty cells, Akmotesh found Gwala sitting cross-legged in the corner of his own. Quickly and wordlessly, he released the hunter, who spoke a brief word of thanks in his mysterious native tongue before arming himself with the other slain guard's sword. "Listen, release me. I can help you get out of here," the remaining prisoner entreated. His former goal now accomplished, Akmotesh turned his attention to the keen-eyed man. "How do I know you're trustworthy?" he asked. "You don't. But do you think I'm going to stab you in the back here in the Temple of the Snake People? You're my best chance of getting out of this pit of vipers, and so long as that's the case, you and I are the best of friends." Akmotesh considered it for a moment. He was right. Without another word, he unlocked the door. "Thanks, friend. You won't regret it. I'm Vendar, adventurer extraordinaire." Akmotesh. "A mysterious wander from the land of the dead, eh? Fine with me. I don't discriminate when it comes to people saving my hide." Vendar picked up the prison guard's cudgel. "Now, let's get out of here." Not yet. Akmotesh was in the process of using the blood of the fallen guards to draw a looped cross upon the brow of the Zumbucan. "I must first anoint you with the sign of Anubis." "I'm not really the religious kind," Vendar said hesitantly. "It will protect you from my spells." Vendar paused with nervous consideration. "All right, then," he acquiesced. The priest drew the symbol, its bars reaching left and right above the eyebrows and down the bridge of the nose, with its upper loop sweeping across Vendar's forehead. With this brief task accomplished, the three prisoners enacted their escape, taking flight down the passageway. "Too bad you hadn't come along earlier," Vendar said. Akmotesh was irritated at his talkativeness. The priest needed to concentrate. "They took away some poor girl a little while back. Maybe you could have saved her." Akmotesh stopped dead in his tracks and cast a pointed gaze in the direction of his new ally. "What are you talking about?" he asked, suddenly much more interested in the prisoner's chatter. Vendar explained. "There was some girl those fork-tongues had captured. They hauled her away not too long before you two came along. Quite a shame. I hate to think of what they did to her." This disturbed Akmotesh greatly, but he let no emotion register on his grim face as he resumed his flight down the prison hallway. The prison was not, surprisingly, in a dark underground oubliette, but rather very close to the main part of the temple, likely for convenient accessibility for the purpose of performing sacrificial rituals. It opened up into a network of passages carved from tan stone, which terminated in a side door granting access to the main congregation hall. The team paused, crouching in the shadows of the archway that led to the temple proper. Beyond, large stone pillars populated a spacious and shadowy chamber, while on the walls could be seen murals of snakemen murdering humans as a massive serpent devoured the sun. About the chamber, cloaked figures could be seen creeping, scaled snouts protruding from hoods of scarlet silk. At one end, a steep stairway led up to a stone altar stained a dark red, the color of unspeakable wine of unspeakable fruits. On the other end, a second, taller set of stairs led to a yawning gateway through which lay escape and salvation. All that needed to be done was for the fugitives to resist detection long enough to be able to make it up the stairs, where they could likely dispatch any guards posted outside, and then to freedom. But there was a thought in the back of Akmotesh's brain that bothered him. He looked back at the bloody altar, remembering Vendar's story of the girl whose acquaintance he had only narrowly missed. Surely the snake people would have murdered her by now, but was there a chance she was still alive? Probably not, he reasoned. At least, the chances were slim enough so as to not warrant risking his own life and those of his companions. He decided to press on. Akmotesh knew the chances of traversing the chamber unnoticed were slim, but they had to take every chance presented to them. He closed his eyes and uttered one of the many ancient spells taught to him by the high priests of his order, harnessing the power of the twilight realm of the dead to make the shadows serve him, obscuring the passing of him and his confederates. Vendar watched in fascination. When the incantation was complete, Akmotesh silently motioned the others to follow his lead as he quickly and stealthily dashed from the doorway to the nearest pillar. Success. The columns were large enough for him and Vendar to hide behind, while Gwala, the stealthiest of the group, hid behind his own. At this point, Gwala took over, sprinting to the next pillar, peeking around it, and signaling to the others when it was safe to follow. Akmotesh marveled at the furtiveness of Vendar, his newfound companion. The northerner's stealth and speed almost rivaled that of Gwala's, and was likely superior to his own. But it wasn't enough. The children of Apsut had keen senses bequeathed to them by their Ophidian lineage, and it wasn't long before one of the reptilian acolytes halted. A forked tongue flicked out of its mouth as it surveyed its surroundings. and began to walk in the direction of Akmotesh and his crew. Gwala turned to signal of the approaching foe to his two companions. Akmotesh was already aware of the problem. Quickly, he weighed their options. It seemed unlikely they could avoid detection given their current position and situation, and so the priest came to a decision, indicating his plan of action to Gwala by drawing a finger across his throat. The hunter understood and tightened his grip on his sword, waited for his quarry to get within a suitable range, and then, silent as a panther, rushed out from behind his hiding place to bury the tip of his sword in the snake man's throat. The creature's scream was muffled, turning into a hissing gurgle as it crumpled to the ground. The trio's already difficult escape now teetered on a razor's edge. The presence of a corpse on the temple floor was about as discreet as a hippopotamus trying to hide behind a reed. With even more urgency, they continued forward, flitting from column to column. They were almost within a short sprint's distance to the stairway, and for a minute Akmotesh thought they might actually be able to escape. He was in the process of dashing to the final pillar before the stair landing when a loud, raspy shout, coupled with hysteric sibilance, sounded from behind him. They had been discovered. "Run!" Akmotesh cried as he and the other sprinted forth. Additional hissing, rasping cries began to join the other in a sort of unholy chorus before the sound of a large gong could be heard reverberating throughout the chamber. The group had made it about halfway up the stairs before two armed guards rushed through the temple exit, swords at the ready. It was 3 on 2, and as Akmotesh and Gwala were seasoned fighters, they slew the guards with ease. The way forward seemed clear, and yet Akmotesh hesitated. Vendar hurried toward the exit. "Come on, let's get out of here," he shouted, looking back at the priest. Despite his better judgment, Akmotesh couldn't leave, not while there was the remotest chances the girl still lived. Being a priest of the death god, Akmotesh III of Kem had little fear for his own life as he stormed back down the stairs and into the temple. But was this efficient, or would it be a waste? The cleric cast these doubts aside, knowing that what was right was often neither efficient nor wise. Earlier, it had been the 3 escaped prisoners against 1, sometimes 2, guards. Now the odds were much more against them, as snakemen acolytes and temple guards alike began to storm into the congregation hall. In preparation for the battle, Akmotesh raised his arms out to the sides, reciting the spell to invoke the powers of the tomb. Most living things naturally seek warmth and light, shrinking from the coldness and dark. The thought of death unnerves them, and so they avoid that which reminds them of their own finite mortality. The priests of Anubis, however, accepted it, embraced it, and learned how to clothe themselves in the very thing most of us find repellent, creating a chilling aura of dread and doom about them. Akmotesh did this now as he prepared for the onslaught of the serpent people.